Hello, everyone. I'm Birce Gökalp, and we will be presenting to you today the gender assessment of the tourism sector in the Gambia that we conducted with my colleague Elaine Tinsley. This is really a result of an extensive desk research and an in-person assessment that we conducted in Banjul, Gambia in May 2023. So we can go to the next slide. We are really, with this assessment, trying to understand ways to boost women's employment, entrepreneurship, and leadership in the tourism sector. We can go to the next slide. Here, we know that travel and tourism have been proven to provide women with more opportunities and actually better opportunities for women's participation in the workforce compared to other sectors of the economy. But we are also recognizing the fact that women are likely to be involved in tourism due to some of the unique characteristics of the sector, such as the barriers to entry being low. And in the Gambia context, we are really trying to document existing gender disparities and some of the challenges in the sector for inclusive tourism to make sure that women can participate and have good jobs in the sector, but also to see how the sector can really benefit from including half of the population and in its economic opportunities in future. So we can go to the next slide where we talk a little bit about the outline of how we thought about this this assessment. So here we will present you kind of the framework that we built before really starting the assessment and some of the findings that we have from the assessments that we conducted in person, and then some of the cross-cutting issues that we looked at, and we end with some of the recommendations that could be relevant to tackle the gaps that we observe in the sector. So the next slide, we talk about the framework on context, and the following slide actually shows you the table. So this is something that we hope that it could be used also by other practitioners or local tourism providers who are interested also in understanding maybe the issues that there might be when it comes to the gender gaps. So here we looked at three buckets, really. The first is employment, the second is entrepreneurship, and the third is leadership. In employment, this is really the wage employment. For example, a woman being employed at a hotel. Here, we are trying to understand some of the gender disparities in participation and earnings, what kind of jobs there are, and also some of the key barriers and issues that might be influencing women's participation levels, but also their earnings. And in entrepreneurship, this is really women as business owners. And here we looked at what kind of businesses there are in the tourism sector, either informal, micro, and again, we looked at what kind of subsectors they might be in, and also if there are any gaps in earnings. And then we also looked at some of the key issues and maybe potential interventions that could really tackle those key issues. And in leadership, we really asked the question of where and how do women participate in leadership and decision-making in the tourism sector, and how does this compare to men? And while we were looking at these three different buckets, because we know these interventions might differ for each bucket, we also recognize some of the ecosystem factors, which we call cross-cutting, really. And this is the policy and institutional framework in the country, and and also the education system that is impacting the skills level of the workforce, and then the social norms. And I know my colleague Fanta here as well after us will talk a little bit about gender-based violence and other issues that are prevalent in the industry as well. So we can go to the next slide. So setting this framework, we also wanted to understand the tourism sector and the subsectors in the Gambia, and what can it say for women's economic opportunities. So we know that the most dominant tourism sector in the country is sun and sea tourism, which is heavily reliant on international tour operators. And when we look at other kind of subsectors that are emerging, our biggest understanding was really the diversification of the tourism sector will also lead to more economic opportunities for women. And we looked at some case studies that might be relevant, and we tried to bring that perspective as well from other countries. For example, we looked at conference tourism. We know conference tourism in itself maybe doesn't create that many jobs, but we know that this is something that could potentially bring in more international visitors, shorten the low season, and there could be opportunities for other jobs in the ecosystem that could benefit women. And we gave the example of Rwanda here. So we can go to the next slide. Here we looked at ecotourism. We know the potential of environmentally and social sustainable practices because these are ecotourism providers tend to hire and source from local women, for example. But we are also recognizing the fact that ecotourism is still a small portion of the broader accommodation or broader tourism opportunities so far. We can go to the next one. So here we looked at culture, tourism, and cruise tourism. And here what's I think interesting is we were trying to really understand when it comes to cruise tourism, how can the local providers take advantage of the tourists coming in with cruises, and how can it be actually turned into something that's beneficial for the local economy? And then, of course, for our assessment, we always ask the question, how can this be benefiting women and local women tourism providers, for example? How can their opportunities be extended in this segment? So this is also a question that we posed in the assessment. So in the next slide, my colleague Elaine will start with some of the gaps that we saw emerging. So I will leave it to her, and I'll be back with later. Thanks.
Thanks, Birja. So if you can go to the next slide. So one of the first things we want to do is kind of understand what the sector looks like. How are women performing against men? So in the first table that we're looking at here, we're looking at where are the men working in tourism versus where are the women working in tourism. And as you can see, accommodations accounts for about 2/3 of all jobs in tourism. After that, followed by that is the food and beverage and entertainment, which is about 1/4 of the jobs. Transport which includes the tour operators, it's a relatively small amount of jobs. And then other tourism establishments, which includes casinos, betting salons, and other entertainment venues, those count for about 10,000. So that helps us to show that if we're going to focus our efforts, a lot of it should be on the accommodation side and also on the food and beverage and entertainment side, because this is where the majority of jobs are. In the ideal scenario, we also want to try and increase the amount of jobs that are happening in other tourism establishments so that the pie actually gets a little bit larger. We can go to the next one. Here in this table, we're actually looking at the gap between the men and the women. So overall, despite the fact that women show strong interest in hospitality, they actually have higher enrollment rates than men in tourism. This is not translating into higher employment shares. In all sectors, male workers are employed at higher numbers than women. So we can also see the gap, and the gap is actually quite substantial. In accommodations for full-time workers, it's about 34%. For part-time workers, this actually goes down. So which indicates that there is a preference to hiring a much stronger preference to hiring male employees for full-time work than there is for female employees. But in the part-time, it's about even. And part of this we'll go into a little bit later on. But one of the concerning issues is that in general in the Gambia, the labor force participation gap is 8.5%. But in tourism, this gap actually rises to about 28% if you're looking at total full-time and part-time. This is contrary to other countries where normally you can see higher female participation than is in tourism than you would see in other places. So the scope for improving women's participation in tourism is actually quite substantial in the Gambia. The gender gap is also, can we go back a little bit? And so even in the gender gap for full-time work is lowest in the food and beverage sector. However, this sector also tends to be more informal, which might explain why it attracts more women, or why women are more employed in that aspect. So there is a strong bias against hiring women, and if the women are being hired, it's for more of the part-time work and also for more of the informal work. All right, we can go to the next one. So what are the barriers to women for organizations or companies to hire women? Why are they not hiring women at higher rates? One of the key issues, excuse me, is that hotels have a de facto policy of not hiring women for evening or night shifts. And especially for smaller hotels, this creates a preference to only hire males, because with males, you can employ them for nighttime shifts or daytime shifts where you don't have that option with female employees. So there's that automatic bias there. The Gambia also has a 6-month paid maternity leave for full-time workers, which might also increase the incentive to hire women as part-time workers. However, it's not to say that the maternity leave policy is wrong, but sometimes the implementation of it might be. For example, in Sao Tome and Principe, they also have a generous maternity leave policy, but the payment for when women go on maternity leave is done through Social Security. And this way, companies and organizations don't have a bias against hiring women, because they know that even when the woman goes on leave, they will still they don't have to cover the payment of it. It's not an additional expense for the hotels. And as a result, women are more likely to come back to the workforce. Whereas in the Gambia, this is also less the case too. On the supply side barriers, why aren't women participating more as employees? There's a strong social norm to not participate in the tourism sector in the Gambia, and particularly because the Gambia has a strong reputation that the tourism sector is there's a sexual reputation to the tourism sector. There's also a strong expectation that the woman also be able to leave work at 4 o'clock so that she can be at home to do household duties. And as a result, there's little incentive for women to go in. And especially it's difficult to fight against those social norms sometimes. Another reason is the seasonality of the work. The Gambia has very strong high seasons and low seasons, and the differences in employment goes down sharply. And the ones that are most likely to be let go are actually the women. So in order to maintain a more year-round income, women often prefer self-employment to control their working hours, as well as to stay economically engaged year-round. And then the third barrier for why women don't join is safety. Transportation costs can be a significant portion. A lot of hotel staff might get a stipend for it, but especially for women, this is important because if they're working late, it can be an additional constraint. Traveling home can take 2 to 3 stops, and street lighting is insufficient, so the safety issue is a big thing. On the other side, there's also cruise ships are actively recruiting for women. This is also creating a huge demand that's actually grabbing a lot of staff away from the hotels and from the tourism sector. And this is creating a burden to actually recruit more. So there's this opportunity, because the cruise ships are actually actively recruiting from the Gambia and actually taking away a lot of hotel staff. The ones more likely to stay working are actually the women. And so onboarding more women and training more women in the sector could actually be quite beneficial. Next slide. So the next section we look at is actually as women as entrepreneurs, and these are some of the women entrepreneurs we met. Next one slide. Within the Gambia, there's in direct tourism, the main type of entrepreneurs we see are craft sellers, beach fruit sellers, tour operator owners, but not necessarily tour operator guides, which tend to be employees. That one we see very little of, and also restaurants. Indirect entrepreneurs would be vegetable suppliers, beauty and skincare products, and fashion. Most women are concentrated in micro, small, or medium-sized businesses. They're heavily in the agribusiness, food processing, cosmetics, and fashion. Women-owned businesses is actually, there's a large discrepancy between male-owned and female-owned businesses. Women-owned businesses only 15 to 20% according to the Chamber of Commerce business database. And most women businesses are single ventures. Like 83% of women-led businesses are solo ventures compared to 63% of male-led businesses. So women-owned, not only are they small, but they also tend to stay small too. You don't see a lot of women. Only 1% of female-led businesses can be classified as medium or large, which is quite a small. Also, the earnings are much lower for women-owned businesses. They make 3,000 Gambian dalasi, which is about $44 compared to the male, which makes about 5,000, which is about $75 or so. Next slide. So when we look at the different sectors, women entrepreneurs in the different sectors, you can see them in the craftswomen. A lot of these craftswomen are resellers. They buy from Senegal and then they resell. There's very little differentiation between one stall and the other stall. There's not that actually built-in Gambian skills, local crafts. And this is a great opportunity to be able to help build locally produced Gambian crafts, because this is also something that tourists are looking for. And other things, these entrepreneurs are basic skills, and some of them need more literacy support and digital skill support to be able to expand, or even to actually be exposed to new ideas. On the second level of women entrepreneurs are those in the agriculture and food processing. Women who dominate this area face challenges of both quality and quantity side. Food testing, packaging, and certification. There are no labs for food or beauty. These usually have to be sent to Senegal for testing. And entrepreneurs actually, they face a lot of problems actually trying to sell their products within the country, especially making linkages with supermarkets. And a lot of times we heard a lot of stories about having to rely on their fathers and husbands to go with them to sell products, or even to get like supermarket shelf space, or even rental issues, because there is a strong bias against women. Food and vegetable producers face problems meeting with the hotel demands in terms of quantity. So this points to the need to have a more systematic organization of food off-takers. And there could be a lot more that could be done to increase linkages between the agriculture and the tourism sector to improve opportunities for women. Likewise with beauty products, the beauty sector is a very common sector for women. They produce soaps, creams, lotions. In other countries, we can see a lot of these within the hotels themselves that they feature it, but we're not really quite seeing that in the Gambia, and this is a good opportunity for it. But like with the food processing, they do need labs and testing before the hotels will actually use them. So there is that kind of issue of like, how do we make sure that we can get these kind of products onto the market? Next slide. Oh, sorry, next slide. So for the entrepreneurs, it's key issues. One is skills training, access to markets, and access to finance. So on the skills training, one is diversifying products, giving them the opportunity to learn how to make new goods, how to make organic products, whether these are done through workshops or knowledge of international trade fairs, something that can help women be able to identify key market opportunities. And also building up their basic skills. On the next one is access to market. There should be more linkages. There are weak linkages to hotels and supermarkets, and this can be improved. The Gambia is a relatively small market, so it's actually important to be able to kind of aggregate where they can. This is why, like, if you have women who are growing produce, maybe they don't produce it on a large scale, but if you have an off-taker model where they can collect the produce from all these different women and sell it to the hotels, then that can be an effective means. There's a lot of room space for imports that could be replaced by home production. Hotels were talking about the shortages of eggs and how they had to like import it. So having more reliable chains and training on how to create those chains is be a good opportunity. Access to finance is also another key thing, especially for women, because all SMEs and micro and small medium enterprises suffer from access to finance, but women are particularly disadvantaged because of the high collateral requirements and the high interest rates and the difficult documentation. For example, only 40.6% of men and only 16.8% of women own a dwelling, which is needed to show collateral to get a loan. And then women also face lower literacy rates and face informational barriers to submit loan applications or apply for grants. So addressing these issues can also help increase women's participation in the sector. Next slide.
Thank you, Elaine. So as we were mentioning in the very beginning, we were looking at women as employees, women as business owners, and we also wanted to understand the decision-making and leadership landscape of the tourism sector. So here, first of all, we look at political leadership, and we see that this is likely, the scarcity of women in these positions is likely to present challenges in prioritizing some of the key legislative reforms and interventions to enhance the safety of women working in the sector. But then we also looked very specifically within the tourism organizations like the hotels, associations, and try to understand the women's presence in leadership. And when we went to the Gambia, we didn't see any of the key public players in the tourism industry being led by women, though of course women have presence at other levels. And when we look at the hotels, we see that 3-4 out of 40 hotel managers are women. Women are usually in back office managerial positions, such as in accounting or sales. And here, some of the key informant interviews highlighted that having women upper hotel management also helped female staff feel more comfortable with reporting issues like harassment. But this is, of course, an area that could be looked into further. We can go to the next slide. And yeah, so we will be talking about some of the cross-cutting issues that are impacting the outcomes, right? The jobs and their earnings. And this is really prevalent across all the three buckets you were talking about. So can we go to the next one? We don't have much time, I think, so I will really try to summarize this very quickly. So this is really the policy and institutional framework. We looked at some of the key players that are formulating tourism policy and overseeing it. But then we looked at also the analysis of women business and the law in 2024. That's an index looking at 190 economies. Gambia is scoring lower than Sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to laws concerning women and business. But I think what is really interesting and relevant for this assessment is that laws concerning workplace is especially low, and it calls the analysis basically is calling for areas of improvement, including enacting legislation protecting women from sexual harassment. And the second thing I want to just highlight on this slide is the limited gender disaggregated data, which is something we always hear when it comes to the gender issues, but it's really also key in this assessment, even something we faced when we were working on it, because lack of data makes it really hard to document the problem. And there are opportunities for some of the players, like, for example, Hospitality and Tourism Institute, to collect more gender disaggregated data on the alumni to see really what is happening and if there are any opportunity areas that could emerge, and then track progress as well. We can go to the next slide. You can also read our assessment for further details on some of these issues. This is really the education landscape, and here we see the one main institute, Tourism and Hospitality Institute. And as Elaine was mentioning, like, there is basically more female students are enrolling and graduating than male students. But we don't see this being reflected in employment, where only 25-30% of, for example, of the hotel workforce is female. So they are likely switching to self-employment, but again, the graduation data from the institute is lacking on this. And here, when we look at the curriculum, there's really the primary, the institute serves the hospitality level, workforce of hospitality rather than a tourism aspect. So we are also highlighting some opportunities here, like new curriculum development, where there could be more focus on soft skills and managerial programs, as well as exploration of new tourism education. We can go to the next slide. This is something my colleague Fanta will talk about in the next presentation. So really very briefly, this is something we are recognizing very much when it comes to tourism. And these are really informal rules when we talk about norms, about what behaviors are typical or desirable in a community. Here we still see, of course, stigma in terms of for women working in the hospitality industry, though from our interviews, people really reported attitudes that are growing, basically that show growing acceptance for women in tourism. But then we also heard about strong social considerations, not to report harassers, which is called maslaha, and some other social issues that are impacting women's role and presence in tourism. And of course, we talk about the gender-based violence as a prevalent issue, which is really affecting both women, girls, and boys in the sector, which again my colleague Fanta will talk more about. So we will move to the next slide, please. So Elaine will take over with the recommendations. Thank you so much.
Right. If you can go to the next slide. So basically, it's like, how do we mainstream women in tourism in the Gambia? So it's like, in terms of employment and earnings in tourism, a lot of it is actually tackling the sexual harassment laws, making it a more inclusive environment for women to work in so that they have less fear, that they feel more inviting. We want more of a feminization of the workforce. Not only is that good for the country by allowing women more opportunities to work, but it's actually good for the tourism sector overall as it makes it more attractive. When a woman tourist goes to a country and she sees that there are other women in the sector, it is a lot more reassuring than if she's looking at a predominantly male-dominated field. So in a sense, the more you can have women in the workforce, the better it is for both the country and for the women themselves. For enhancing women's entrepreneurship out at common tourism, this is more about improving market linkages, really being able to tie it. Who can help facilitate these kind of measures so that you can overcome some of the social norms, that there's more aggregation. You want to also invest skills in women entrepreneurs. You want to tackle the access to financing gap. And you want to really be able to encourage expanding the artisan craft space. The more you can develop the other segments of tourism, whether we're talking about the cruise tourism offerings or we're talking about the conference tourism, the more you're going to be able to provide opportunities for women entrepreneurs to come in and step in to create a little niche and provide a more interesting offering for the tourists that are coming to the Gambia. And with that, you can elevate the experience that tourists have and attract more tourists in return. And how does all of this get done? And this is where I think leadership and women in leadership in the tourism sector, whether it's leadership in the hotels or it's leadership in the associations, becomes quite vital, because you need to be able to do more to shift the Gambia's reputation to be a more family inclusive environment, to be more women friendly, so that the issues and concerns of making women joining the workforce or having opportunities with it become stronger. So there are many different examples globally that can actually be coming to help improve this stuff, but you do need women in leadership or very strong male politicians too, who can take this advocacy role to the next level. So I think I will stop there. So we can go back to the next slide. So this is just another way of looking at the different areas on how to improve the ecosystem, how to improve the crafts and products, expanding markets and clients, skills and social norms. These are more specific recommendations and examples of what can be done. Next. Risha, do you want to come in on this one? Or?
Yeah, very briefly, really. This is something we wanted to highlight and we talk about a bit more in the report as well. It's really like looking at some of the digital opportunities that could be beneficial for women entrepreneurs. It was just like a specific case study. As Elaine was mentioning, one area of opportunity is really increasing the linkage between agriculture and the buyers in the tourism industry. And we saw that there are already existing platforms which connect farmers, women farmers, to these markets. So we also wanted to highlight these digital options as kind of a potential way to help balance demand from low to high season. So I think this is it as far as I I can tell. So thank you so much for listening. I don't know if Elaine, you want to come in on the last remarks.
No, thank you very much for attending our masterclass.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Fantajata So. I am the gender-based violence specialist for the Tourism Diversification and Resilience Project in the Gambia. And I have a pleasure to share this experience with you. So I've been asked to just look at gender-based violence within the tourism sector and discuss from experience and also what is needed, especially for lead farm proprietors to know about, to contribute to the prevention and also supporting people who face or experience gender-based violence, and also give example from at least one country, and I'm comfortable to talk about Gambia. So we'll be discussing that. Let's move on to the next slide. So basically, there are a few key terms that have been used. Generally, we'll explain their meaning as usual, what the situation is. This will also bring about the example from Gambia and what lead farms can do or what they need to know, and a call to action to ensure that people at the highest level practice symbolic leadership to ensure that sexual harassment, gender-based violence is either reduced or minimized, especially the impact on vulnerable people. And conclusion. Thank you. Next slide. So basically, when we talk about gender-based violence, sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, these are the keywords that I use. So you have GBV normally being referred to in this case, which have been defined by different organizations based on their standards or based on what they need, but normally we use the UN definition of GBV. It's an umbrella term for any harmful act that is perpetrated against a person's will and that is based on socially ascribed gender differences. That's very important to highlight, the socially ascribed, because these things differ from country to country, even within countries, from region to region. You know, the expectations from men and women, children and elderly people differ from society to society. So it is actually based on those socially ascribed expectations that GBV can be measured against somebody. And they can occur in public, but also in private. Sexual exploitation is any act or attempt or attempted abuse of position of vulnerability, differential power or trust for sexual purpose, including but not limited to profiting monetarily, socially, or politically from sexual exploitation of another. So mainly for sexual exploitation, is an abuse of a position of vulnerability. You know, somebody in a privileged position sees, you know, a person in a position of vulnerability, maybe a woman, a child, a poor person, uneducated, you know, they use those vulnerabilities against the person, and in some cases, the victim or the survivor may think they are benefiting in the instance of, let's say, uh, forced prostitution, for example, or trafficking. The person may feel they are benefiting, but in most cases, in the actual sense, they are not. They are being exploited. Next. Sexual abuse is also the actual or threatened physical intrusion of a sexual nature, whether forced or under unequal or coercive conditions. Sexual abuse is a broad term. It includes a number of acts, including rape, sexual assault, among others. So sexual abuse is a more direct form of violence against anyone, could be man, woman, boy, or girl. And sexual harassment is any form of unwanted verbal or non-verbal physical conduct of a sexual nature with the purpose or effect of violating the dignity of a person, in particular with creating an intimidating, hostile, or degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. It may include unwelcome sexual advances or requests for sexual favors, and may take place through online activities, mobile communications, and the rest, you know, as well as in person. It can happen at workplaces, but outside of work, in work-related activities. So, yes, we can move to the next slide. The term, move to the next slide, please. Next slide.
Kati, could we pause the recording?
Yeah, could you please send the slide?
Are you seeing the slides change, Kartik?
Yeah, I can see.
It's changing for you?
It's not changing for me.
Maybe it's frozen.
Just change again. Change the slide.
Can you see that changing? Are you on what is the
Started.
Okay. Survivor-centered approach is also a best practice, and in most cases, this is what is used to ensure that those who experience a GBV or sexual exploitation and abuse are not further traumatized. So the approach puts the survivor of violence or harm at the center of any response process. It recognizes that violence, particularly sexual violence, is carried out in order to remove the power from the person who experienced it. And the survivor-centered approach tries to place back that power. So in the process of responding, you're trying to again empower or give back the power to the survivor. It considers the rights, the choices, the dignity, confidentiality, and safety of the survivor, and ensures that the survivor's family and their community do not come to harm any further, cause any harm, further harm as a result of having chosen to report. And this is specifically important in the case of the Gambia, as the previous speaker was talking about. We have this term called the Maslaha syndrome, which really is a cultural practice that tries to deter reporting. So the use of this approach in contexts like Gambia is very much empowering and will encourage reporting, and will support survivors not to be further traumatized. Next. So tourism is been documented, in several researches and evidence that the tourism sector is beneficial for women, especially provides a lot of opportunities for women compared to other sectors, and mainly maybe because you don't need a lot of high level competencies to start. So it has really provided opportunities for women, so that's good. It constitutes over 54% of all tourism workers, according to the UNWTO, are women. However, this is very nice to see, but the high representation is not equal to empowerment. We have seen from the previous presentation too, and women continue to be paid less than men, and overall by 14.7%. So you can see that although more than half of the tourism sector workers are women, their cumulative worth is less than their counterpart. The majority of women working in tourism, particularly they're in the hospitality, entertainment sectors, which are again highly susceptible to GBV, SEASH experiences. So this warrants, why do we need to talk about GBV, SEASH within the tourism sector? Because those who are providing the services, the labor, are the ones who are most susceptible to this kind of violations. Next. So in the Gambia, there's a high prevalence of sexual harassment and sexual abuse among women working in the tourism sector. We have seen this in many researches. ECPAT has brought a lot of evidences in this. We have seen in the Gambia Demographic and Health Survey, right, over 40% of women experiencing sexual violence and exploitative sexual behaviors or sexual relationships between tourists and local women are also evident. We have seen this in so many reports, including the Ministry of Women and Children now, then the Women's Bureau. We have also seen it in the report of the National Human Rights Commission. And underreporting, as I said, the Maslaha syndrome has also been documented even in the last 2020 Demographic and Health Survey. This issue of not reporting has been highlighted, and the issue of even accepting some forms of violence under certain circumstances. For instance, when a woman argues with her husband, or when a woman goes out without taking permission, it is justified to be beaten. So these are pre-existing conditions that allows, other forms or more aggrieved forms of violence to be meted against women, and the space will not be conducive for them to report and seek justice. There is limited access to justice, and also the support services are also limited. So this is really an issue in the Gambia, and it has been documented in so many different researches. Next. And it is unfortunately been documented that Gambia is known for sex tourism. So this is a motivation for people who travel for sex to just search and look for destination Gambia, and that increases the risk levels for women, for children especially. It has been prevalent that it exists in the Gambia. This, especially the expert report of 2014 has brought a lot of revelations. It's entitled "Don't Look Away." It has brought in a lot of revelations on sex tourism in the Gambia, and it has also been identified as a source, transit, and destination for trafficking of children for the purpose of labor and commercial sexual exploitation. So this situation, although is not peculiar to Gambia, is one of the dark sides of tourism, and all efforts need to be put in place to ensure that tourism is beneficial to all and not exploitative or harmful to people, especially those who cannot voice out. Next. So even though we have all these problems, there are attempts or initiatives to ensure that these problems are mitigated or prevented. Again, is to emphasize that these initiatives are not just enough. We need to do more. Gambia has ratified almost all international instruments that safeguard against child sexual exploitation, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, domestic violence. We have the Children's Act and so many other national legislations, the Tourism Offences Act, the Trafficking Offences Act. There's also the Sexual Offences Act 2013. All of these in efforts to ensure that there are legal frameworks and mechanisms to ensure that there is accountability and impunity is not encouraged in such cases. Gambia has also put in place a security unit, a tourism security unit, which was really applauded, when it was newly initiated. And a lot of strides have been made to empower the security unit. However, there are still room for improvement in even the training and increasing the professionalism of the tourism security unit in terms of mobility, their patrols, and sensitivity to issues, because the tourism security personnel are personnel from within the Gambian community, And so our concepts of concepts of the maslaha is still within us. So to ensure that the professionals at the tourism security unit, can think out of the traditional concepts and thinking, needs a lot of concerted and continuous capacity building. Yeah. So the tourism board also has a code of conduct, and they're trying as much as possible to ensure that partners within the sector are committed by signing all of these code of conduct. And especially for the big hotels, the lead firms, they really are trying. And now what we are seeing is a lot of tourists coming into the Gambia and not lodging into the hotels where there are controls. They go into the communities where the controls are lax, the monitoring very difficult. So this is really a very big issue because now in the hotels, really, for example, a tourist coming in with a minor, you have questions to answer. But when the tourist is within the community, then it becomes easier, especially if it's a poor family that tourist becomes friendship with, and it's been able to give a few pounds or dollars to the family members, then and pretends to maybe sponsor the child, for instance, it becomes very difficult to monitor. At the airport also, at the arrival, there are messages, that provide cues for visitors that Gambia doesn't tolerate child sex tourism, and that it is punishable under the law. So that's a good practice. And the GT board also has a weekly radio program that talks about different issues within the tourism sector, including issues of GBV, SEA, and the Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Welfare, under their Social Welfare Department, has also established the Neighborhood Watch. These are groups of community members that have been identified by the communities as watchdogs, and also trained, by the different actors to ensure that they monitor and they are vigilant and they report on issues of especially child sex abuse issues. So these are good practices. They need to be expanded. They need to be improved a lot to ensure that we reduce the impact of sex tourism in the Gambia. Yeah, next slide. So the lead firms, proprietors, managers, human resource departments within the tourism sector, they play a crucial role in responding and also preventing sexual harassment and abuse at workplace, and creating safer workplaces for all. So some of the things that we need to be critically aware of, next slide please, is for these stakeholders that I've just spoken about to understand vulnerabilities, right? The tourism sector, we need to just the understanding that the sector in itself is an environment that creates vulnerabilities, particularly for workers in the hospitality, entertainment, and travel services, who are mainly women and mainly not highly educated women, they are vulnerable to these issues because of their interactions. In most cases, they are frontliners. So their position in itself is highly vulnerable. Next is to also understand that there are specific risks, in relation to the different destinations. They need to be aware of that the cultural factors may increase the likelihood of GBV incidences, and therefore, as a hotel owner, for example, risk assessment is very critical and towards the prevention of GBV in the industry. Next. So now, knowing all these issues, what can we do? What do we want them to do? People in the human resource department, senior management, lead farm proprietors, what do we want them to do? Next. Is to ensure that we have policies and procedures that are established to address these issues, to ensure that we include the definitions for people to understand, because as I said, there are cultural differences that might confuse people as to what boundaries are, for instance. So we expect them to put in place policies and procedures that clearly explains what the definitions are, the terms are, and also put in place these disciplinary actions to ensure that all employees are aware of these policies and they are also aware of their rights, so that will encourage reporting. The next thing we want them to do, apart from policies and procedures, is next slide, please. Next. Okay, go back. Okay, staff training and awareness is very critical. Rarely you find this in the tourism industry. In most cases, it is talked about, but when you talk to staff within the industry, there has never been an organized, systematic training for staff, especially for those who join newly. And unfortunately, in the case of the Gambia, even in the Tourism Training Institute, this is not part of their curriculum. Just yesterday, we had a validation workshop because we did a screening there, a risk assessment for a sub-project that we want to conduct there. This project wants to conduct a kitchen expansion. So a social and environmental screening was done. And one of the risks that we identified is the fact that GBV SEA modules are not part of the curriculum of the training. And during the focus group discussions, one of the students, the meeting with the student, the female only group, said, the tourism sector is highly susceptible to sexual harassment issues. And we are being trained here, we are being prepared for that sector that is highly risky. And we are being trained, given all the skills and competencies, in this area, except for this one that really can affect us. And when it affects you, it will affect you all other competencies, because if someone is raped or harassed, for instance, you are not able to serve properly, you are not able to make the room properly, because you are disturbed, you are traumatized. So during our validation, we give back this information, the feedback to the management of GTHI, that we highly recommend that a GBV model is incorporated in your curriculum so that it is systematically trained. But in the meantime, the project will try as much as possible to conduct periodic trainings for students. So staff training and awareness is, for me, in fact, the first step to ensure that people know about these issues. They know the warning, the early warning signs, and they know what to do to protect themselves. Next. Customer awareness, tourists need to be educated about respectful behaviors, and these need to be displayed in conspicuous places to ensure that they always provide cues for people. Always there is something to remind you that you cannot misbehave. It is not tolerated. So we expect that proprietors will take this on board to ensure that workplaces are safe for the workers especially. Next. They need to create a safe space. The workers, the employees within the tourism sector, they have to symbolize this. They have to foster a workplace culture that promotes respect, equity, and dignity for all employees. And this has to start with them as employers. They have to live and work those qualities, and encourage open communication and create channels for reporting. This is really lacking in most tourism employment facilities. Next. Support services, they also need to be present, because otherwise you create the demand and the supply is not there. That is even more frustrating. So we expect that employees within the tourism sector will provide services that support those who experience GBV, including counseling, legal assistance, and medical support, to ensure that, as I said earlier on, the survivor-centered approach is used to make sure that survivors are not re-traumatized, and they've been able to be supported during the process to gain back their dignity and power in the process. Next. They also have to encourage or promote accountability to ensure that perpetrators are held accountable for their actions, and make sure that it is clear that GBV will not be tolerated in the workplace regardless of the perpetrator or seniority. If really this is in place, it is going to help a lot in deterring subsequent perpetrators. Next. Collaboration is key in this case, because the issue of GBV is multi-sectoral. It has medical, economic, psychosocial dimensions. So all these expertise or competencies may not be available at one point. So it is important that the employers collaborate with other service providers and specialized services to ensure that wherever they cannot provide the support, they're able to refer to the next level. That is key. So that being the case, we expect them to map out all the service providers, know where they are, who they are, what they provide, and initiate links between them to ensure that there is smooth referral pathway and employers or employees are also educated about those referral pathways. Next. Monitoring is also very key, which helps organizations to learn, reflect, and improve. So it should be part of those minimum standards for every employer, especially within the tourism sector that is highly prone to GBV incidences, to ensure that they put in place monitoring and evaluation mechanisms to continuously learn and improve. Next. Legal compliance. As I started in the beginning, we already have laws in many countries that prevent or lay certain minimum standards. So we expect that proprietors will at least try to comply with those legal provisions in countries to ensure that at least that is an entry point to ensure that GBV is prevented and responded to when it occurs. Next. The leadership commitment. It has to be visible. It just has to be out there. So, for instance, within the PIU here, when somebody sees me, it's as if you are seeing no to GBV, zero tolerance to sexual harassment. We need to have those leaders, who really, when you see them, you see those commitments because of what they do, how they talk, how they handle, issues, their interactions with employees. So we expect them to embrace a symbolic leadership that is committed and have no patience for GBV. Next. Yes, continuous improvement is also highly encouraged to ensure that they stay informed about best practices and emerging trends, and ensure that resources are put aside to enhance the firm's approach to addressing GBV issues. Next. So it is hoped that by prioritizing these aspects, lead farm proprietors in the tourism sector can create safer and more respectful workplaces where employees, especially the most vulnerable, feel empowered to report incidences of GBV, SEASH, and receive support as they need. Yeah, so this is I think with all this we can conclude that if they are put in place, if these actions are taken, we will have a better place and safe place for all. Thank you. Next. I think that's the last slide. Yeah. Thank you.